came here tonight and got here on time. We'll go ahead and start the meeting on time. So we have we have Councilman Mahoney, we have Councilman Hetzel, Councilman Hicks, and I saw Councilman Benson earlier. Okay.
Benson's been saying.
Okay, yeah, Benson's on a phone call. Okay. And then Katie Cunningham sent a text message saying that she's going to be a little late, but she'll be here. And Randy Roberts is going to be out. So who are we missing? Norma's here, right? Okay, yeah, Norma Sanchez-Stevens. Okay. And so can I get a motion to excuse Councilman Randy Roberts? Okay, I got a motion and a second. All right, all in favor? Okay, all right, any opposed? Hearing none, we are in favor, and we'll go ahead and open up the meeting for City Council, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Marcus Mattingly, the president of EDC.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to call the EDC meeting to order. We have one excused absence, that is Mr. Derek Otto, and I would like to ask for a motion for excused absence.
I'll make a motion to excuse Derek Otto.
Okay, I have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, perfect. The motion passes. Thank you. Pass it back over to you, Mayor.
All right, thank you so much, Marcus. Okay, so we handled the roll call and excused absences. We're going to move on to the invocation. Would you mind, Councilman Hicks?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for bringing us together to discuss business here in the city of Cibolo. Let these discussions be pleasing to you and moving forward with our city and our plans. And just watch over our first responders and watch over our military personnel as they protect this nation. And these things we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the citizens to be heard portion of the meeting. Okay, no sign-ups? Okay, all right, so no signed up for citizens to be heard? Okay. We're going to move on to discussion action. 6A, discussion presentation from RKG Associates, Inc. regarding the city's economic development strategic plan. Kelsey.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Council, EDC board members, our friends in the audience there. So we are having an update from our consultant for the EDC strategic plan, Kyle Talenti, who's going to be presenting specifically tonight on some implementation items and reviewing the goals, the draft goals that you saw at the last joint meeting, but further drilling down into what are the actual steps that are recommended to achieve those goals and outcomes. So I know he has a little bit of a presentation, and then I assume we'll open it up for discussions. All right, I'm going to go pull that up.
Well, this will be new for me, carry this thing around with me. I feel like Wink Martindale from Let's Make a Deal with that tall, skinny microphone he used to carry, if you're old enough to remember that. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us back. We're now in the exciting part of the process. No longer talking about data, but talking about, all right, what do we want and how do we get there? And so I wanted to start with circling back to the goals. We had a really good and engaging conversation. We went back and massaged some of the language. I know there was some requests. Oh, we good? I got it. It was, I think it's turned off. So there we go. Anyway, and so we went back, we massaged them a little bit, changed some of the language based on your requirement, but it felt as after the conversation that in general the community was supportive, or this group was supportive of the direction within the goals that we had talked about. One of the interesting things that I think is going to need to happen as you guys move forward, and I'm going to approach this after we finish this part of the conversation, is the prioritization of what you want to accomplish first, second, and third. Because as we've talked about, and we're going to talk about in a minute, is there's a little bit of a mismatch between the full menu of options that we're talking about here and our staff resources and our financial resources to execute that at a higher trade you. Is this working? Well, I know you guys are going to hear me because I think they can hear me 3 blocks down the street, but it's more about the online component of it. But at any rate, so is to try and right-size our expectations and our prioritization with the resources that we have, with effectively 2.5 people and a budget that is available to execute upon the mission. And so I want to stop here for a moment, and if there's any last questions or conversation about these before we move into, all right, how do we get these done? And what are the things that we need to do to put ourselves in position for success? All right, stunned silence. That's fantastic. So I will say that, just to be very, very clear, not just to all of you, but to anyone who ever watches this, is these are not in any particular order on here. If that is something that the community wants, is to rank these and prioritize them, to put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, we'll be happy to do that within the document. But this is more a recognition that these are our goals, and they're not necessarily meant to be first, second, third, fourth. But I'm happy to do that if that's the will of the EDC. If you want to tell me, hey, Kyle, reorder it this way, we'll be happy to do that for you. So before we jump into the specific action items, I kind of wanted to go through what I like to call Kyle's PSA, or just some recognition of things as you are considering to move forward, because there are going to be action items that you take on immediately. Many of the action items are things that you're already doing, that you're going to be continuing doing. And then over time, you may be adding more after you prioritize what your goals are. And so I know this is not going to stay with you all for the 5 to 10 years that you're going to be using this plan. And so I kind of wanted to put some ideas so that as you are considering action items a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, that there's some context of what we talked about here as a group and what we're intending to accomplish as EDC board members turn over, as city council members turn over, so that there is a legacy that people understand, because implementation for economic development is a marathon and not a sprint. We're not going to accomplish everything here immediately. It's going to require consistency and steadfastness to be able to accomplish what we're talking about here. And so hopefully this will give you some of that kind of framework. One is, what we want and what we are investing in are out of sync. I mentioned this already, and this one is the most important, which is why it's on top, is we have effectively 2.5 full-time staff members, and right now 1.5 full-time staff members to execute economic development on behalf of the city of Cibolo. And business retention, business recruitment, asset development, marketing and coordination, workforce development, all the things that are important and important to the community require a capacity much greater than 2.5 people. And so, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we see that. And so we need to, I used the term earlier, we're a mile wide and a foot deep. And as a result, we're not really great, if you will, at any one thing. We're above average or good, but we're not really specializing and executing upon those things that we can really take advantage of. And so our perspective has always been, and our clients that we have worked with that have gotten more focused and tried to scale what they're trying to accomplish with what they have to accomplish it, have seen greater results. And so we're going to talk about how Kyle would prioritize everything, and then you guys then will ultimately, as a community, make the decision of do that, do some sort of modification of that, or chuck that out the window and do it completely differently. Maintain a consistent agenda. Like I just mentioned, economic development is a long-term process. It's not a short-term process. Relationship building, and we're going to talk a lot about business retention. What we've heard through this process is not all businesses in the community, one, understand what economic development it is and how it could benefit them, or don't want to be engaged with the city's economic development efforts, maybe because they don't understand what it's for or how it works or what its intent is. And so that's just one example of how it's going to take time. Some businesses may come to the table immediately. It may take you years to develop a relationship and trust of others. And so the continued effort is going to be critical for your success. And so identifying your vision, establishing priorities, being very clear and steadfast with that, avoiding one-offs, as I like to call them. There's a new shiny term out there in the world of economics. Oh, let's go chase after that now. That is always the challenge for a small economic development staff of constantly be pulled in multiple directions. If you take a look at the old ED strategy and what we're recommending for action items, there are a number of things that we have completely left off that are not quote-unquote economic development. That is our efforts to try and help you focus in on things that an economic development staff can actually accomplish in what is traditionally within their job requirements. So one of them that jumped out to me when I reviewed it again this morning was trying to match homeowners with homeowner assistance programs. Very important from community development perspective, but it is not an economic development activity. And for the time that your economic development staff spends trying to do that is time taken away from actually doing business retention, business recruitment, workforce development. And so we've left all those sorts of things out of this strategy because they're not economic development. They're important, and we're not saying they're not important, but I was asked to write an economic development strategic plan, not a community development strategic plan. And so we're going to be looking at that. Find a balance between development scale and economic opportunity. This is for emerging suburban communities like Cibolo, where you were really, really small 20 years ago, and now you're mid-size and you're projected to be growing and growing and growing, trying to find the balance and avoiding some of the decisions that your more mature neighbors have made that they're now trying to undo is an opportunity you have that they do not. And so trying to find that balance of development scale and economic development opportunity is a critical component. Terms like density, housing diversity, I can understand how those can be scary to people when you're talking about, because it's change. It's different from maybe the path that we've been following for the past 10 or 15 or 20 years. But the reality is you're on a precipice of being able to make decisions that can put you in a position to avoid some of the challenges that other communities that kind of went with that uniform suburban scale development are now trying to undo. Infill development, redevelopment, trying to reposition assets that are partially viable, are partially financially feasible, but aren't fully, and so they're not performing the way you want them to. Well, trying to undo a half-full 30-year-old strip center is a lot harder than creating what you want in the first place when it's not developed today. And so if you look through the opportunity sites section of the report, you'll see some of the recommendations that we have, including some of the zoning strategies of how to create different development typologies and bring a diversity of housing, bring a diversity of activity that looks different than what you have and looks different than most of your neighbors have. We're talking about some of the things that are more San Antonio based, not the same scale as them, but a concept similar to that, which is what a lot of your neighbors and a lot of other suburban communities here in Texas, we're doing a lot of work, North Dallas, in Plano, in that area. They're trying to undo some of those decisions they made in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. You have the opportunity to not do that now. And so we came up with a lot of recommendations that challenge kind of the status quo. And we understand how that could be difficult. It's not always going to be successful, but trying to find that balance between scale and opportunity is, frankly, for us, an exciting moment for the city of Cibolo to kind of do it in a way that is more sustainable in the long term. And then finally, embrace market realities and plan around them. You know, we did our best to try and find ways to truly create a continuum for your community. It's not a secret to all of you that there's folks that are aging here in place. The baby boomer generation is substantial, and it's substantial not just here, but in the entire United States. Housing preferences are changing. People don't necessarily need a house with a yard. They don't necessarily want to have the maintenance of a 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom home when it's just them and their spouse, or ultimately just them in certain circumstances. And so trying to create that opportunity for a continuum of everyone from the person right out of high school or right out of college to the family that are raising their children, to the retiree that's looking to age in place and stay in the community. Those are things that you can embrace as a community, which not only provides opportunities for Cibolo residents in their 20s, 40s, 60s, and 80s to continue to be part of this community in a comfortable manner, it helps you from an economic development perspective. It creates a continuum of workforce because yes, you need CEOs and yes, you need higher level executives, but you also need mid-level and entry-level executives, and you also need service and production-based employees too. And so when we looked at the employment growth numbers, not just for Cibolo, but for the region, that's going to be a big challenge. The communities that are going to get the greatest wins are the ones that have the greatest to offer to companies of being able to pull from a labor force that is close by. And so when looking at embrace those realities and plan around them, I think it's definitely one of the things we hope that you take away from this. And we recognize, and I understand that our opportunity sites analysis has a lot of ideas for a lot of different parts of the city, and many of them, maybe even all of them, will never come to fruition in the way that we describe them. That's okay, because the way we wrote them is to explain to you what we think the economic development opportunity is, and then help you shape the ideas using those concepts, not necessarily having to follow them to the letter. So that's kind of the preamble, if you will, of as we talk about these different ideas and concepts, what I wanted to leave and impress upon you all, because I understand that there's going to be, this plan is aspirational, and it's intentionally aspirational. It pushes the limits, it pushes the status quo of your community purposefully to help you think and consider and make decisions based off of additional information and be more informed as you're making choices, so you understand when you decide A over B or left over right, you understand the impact of that. So we do our best to try and organize strategies to make it as understanding as possible. However, the reality is that a lot of these different categories overlap with each other. So there are things that are business retention that can also apply to business recruitment. Marketing, outreach, and communication overlaps everything that we're talking about, because business retention, business recruitment requires marketing, outreach, and communication. So we did our best to try and group ideas together, but hopefully you all understand that they're not mutually exclusive of each other. And I just wanted to kind of lay that out there. So for BRE and from RKG Associates' perspective, we think this is the opportunity that gives you the greatest potential for job and business growth with the least amount of investment, is trying to work with the existing businesses that you have and help them grow. And so there's a number of strategies. Many of them you're already doing. We're hoping that through this we help you maybe focus your efforts so you can invest more staff time and resources in doing it more or differently. But continue to develop your list of all businesses in the city. There is nothing more valuable to your BRE effort to know everybody who's here. I know you have, for example, the home-based business affidavit, which requires the honor system, if you will, for someone who has a home-based business to actually come in and fill it out. The state of Texas has a phenomenal licensing and business requirements. I was going through that earlier today just to refresh my memory, and really, no matter what you do, there's a number of different things that you have to apply for with the state to make sure that you're doing it correctly and legal. And so mining those databases to get businesses that are here physically in Cibolo is a great way to ensure that when you communicate and outreach, and there's some of those we'll talk about in a moment, that it's reaching everybody. Because that's critical. Because if there are businesses that are hesitant to engage with a City of Cibolo economic developer, providing them information, and not just what you can do and what's available, but success stories, and keep them informed of saying, oh, we talked to business X, Y, and Z, and they had this problem, and here's how we helped them solve it, and now they're doing this. Providing that proof of concept will be a much stronger way to get them to engage than just showing up at their door and knocking, saying, hey, I'm here from the city, I want to help. Okay, and so it's a critical first step and a very important first step, and one that you're already doing, but there are ways that you can continue to expand and provide focus on that. The next is implementing an annual business survey. We tried to do this, I'll say that, through this process. There is no more cost-effective way of reaching all your businesses and collecting information on companies that are struggling to grow, are struggling to succeed, are growing and succeeding beyond what the capabilities of their current space is, and getting that information back that you can then collect all at one time and then come up with a BRE strategy for that year after that survey is over to say, okay, we have these 12 businesses that need more space than they currently have, and we have to try and help them find that space here in the city. And we have these 5 businesses that are saying that if they can't fix this problem, they're going to have to close in the next 6 months. And so this is a critical component that hopefully you will be able to free up resources for staff to put in to do this on an annual basis so that you can learn from many, many different companies all at one time rather than having to physically show up, because that takes time and resources. We have provided, yes, sir.
On that subject, I thought we had a survey that we used to do for our businesses.
So when Miss Ellis does her business retention visits, we do have a survey that we ask them to fill out ahead of time. But that is on a one-on-one basis right now. We don't have just a community-wide survey that's currently out. To Mr. Talenti's point, we tried to do one last year open to all businesses, but I think with the surveys open for the I-10 corridor plan and resident surveys going out and the comp plan surveys going out, I think it might have gotten a little lost in it. But doing an annual survey would be something for us to either restart or to start.
A little survey fatigue. Because we do have a business that I know of. It's entertainment. It's the golf go-kart out there on 10. His big problem is trying to get traffic to him because of all the construction out there. And now we've got Bolton Road tore up. He just called me last week. So you're right. This would help, and we need to figure out a way to help him however we can to keep that entertainment business going. So.
Absolutely. And so when I did the economic development strategy for a community outside of Atlanta during COVID, we did substantial outreach because, as you all know, the businesses were losing their minds about whether or not they were even going to be able to stay open. And I had about 24 conversations with different businesses, one-on-one interviews that I did through that process. And during that process, I talked to a caterer that was struggling to be able to grow because they didn't have the kitchen space to be able to prepare enough food, and they couldn't find kitchen space to be able to grow. And so they were considering leaving that city because they needed to go find somewhere that had more facilities. I interviewed a restaurant owner that did breakfast and lunch only, and so they were shut down by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I talked to that person after I talked to the catering person. I said, hey, would you ever consider renting out your kitchen from 5 to 9 through a program to generate additional revenue that can then help an existing business in the city grow and expand and meet their needs? And they're like, well, we never thought of it, and we'd want to know the assurances of how it's going to be clean before the next morning and stuff. But yeah, we would be interested in doing that. I like giving that example because that's the perfect example in my mind of, like, if I hadn't talked to those two businesses individually and hear the problem of one and the opportunity of the other, the potential to help that business grow in our community and hire more people, generate more revenue, but also stay, would have never come to be fruition. And that was just a one-off lucky chance of a conversation. There was nothing more than being able to hear their issues and make a matchmaker. A BRE program, the most effective BRE program, is one that just hears what's going on in the community and networks and connects businesses to each other to help solve the problems. It's not about the city fixing their issues. It's about knowing enough to know, I'm having an issue with this, that person has that opportunity, or half the businesses we talk to are struggling with the signage law. Maybe we need to reconsider it because of A, B, and C. That's the true value of a BRE program. And getting to as many businesses as you can with the resources that you have is going to be a critical component of that. And delivering those success stories of when you are able to help them to build trust and to build faith and communication is also going to be important. And frankly, it's going to take also leadership both from the EDC and from the council to spread that word and saying, hey, look, this is legit and we're doing this and I'm behind it and I know what's going on, because it's not very easy, and I'm going to pick on Izzy because right now she is economic development for the city, but it's not very easy to show up and not have a relationship with that person and in 15 minutes get them to buy in that you're there and your intentions are true. It's a lot easier to talk to someone who's been in the community forever or has owned a business in the community forever to say, hey, these guys are legit. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Someone else? Yes.
I just had a question about, I know you were talking about the resources that you currently have within economic development. So the strategy around expanding the outreach, is this section, I guess, sort of baseline, as in your recommendation would be that these activities would be centered around the current FTE count within economic development as a baseline, or are you also recommending like professional services as well to expand their reach
So-
in order to increase that effectiveness?
BRE is one of the things we think you should be focusing on and committing more of your resources than you currently do. And because Izzy, in her role, has more than just business retention as a responsibility.
Right.
And so that position right now is not able to commit the full 40-hour work week, if you will, and I put that in quotes because very few people work 40 hours anymore, to be able to commit to this. And so we think this is something you should be committing to. We think there's other things that the community is doing that maybe should be sidelines, like any sort of entrepreneurial work is something that's going to require additional resources that right now we don't have. And so I would, like, that's just an example of something that maybe is a longer term strategy so that those resources can be focused back on the BRE piece. And the next one really talks about, you know, the reality of what a full-time position of that can do, about 10 target business per month at most. You know, that's not a lot, to be honest with you, even from a single FTE, which is why we recommend a number of things. One, training business ambassadors to work hand in hand with your business retention individual, that they can go do those on, you know, in parallel. We talk about hiring an additional BRE person at some point in time that would then expand capacity and then open the door for some of those other things to happen that we're recommending to be sidelined. But in our opinion, BRE is something that you should be refocusing some of your existing assets to try and do it more and different and better, and then think about how you can expand your capacity over time. Immediately getting volunteers to come in and work hand in hand through like the ambassador program, we'll talk about that in just a bit, but also maybe at some point in time hiring additional part-time, full-time staff that can work in hand so that we can expand that capacity.
Yeah, hey, real quick, before we get off this slide and go on to the next topic, I wanted to bring up something about business retention and expansion and just kind of get your, I guess, philosophy or your input on whether or not what I'm worried about is real or not. And so, you know, I understand business retention. That makes perfect sense. I mean, you want to reach out to the business owners and, you know, see how their sales are doing and what we can do to help them, you know, succeed. Now, when it comes to expansion, like here's an example, like we have a Willie's, right? You know, Willie's restaurant over there in Cibolo. And so if we were to say, you know, hey, Willie's, you know what, why don't you open up another one, you know, here in Cibolo? Are there rules for these certain restaurants, especially the chain ones, that say, hey, look, you can't open up, you know, 2 Willie's within 10 miles of each other or something like that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to say is, you know, sometimes that expansion, I mean, we want it, but there may be rules against that as far as from these corporations, right?
Yes. So restaurants in particular are not going to overpopulate an area and do what's called cannibalization, where they're going to take sales from an existing space and just transfer it to another space that then they have to pay for staff and rent and all that other stuff. And so, yes, those types of businesses are going to look and say, you know, and here's an easy one, Walmart. Walmart has a 5-mile radius strategy for urban sites and 10 miles and up for suburban and rural sites. And so they try not to locate their stores closer than that to each other. Okay, that's an easy example. Everyone knows who Walmart is, right? And so restaurants, especially chain restaurants, have a similar decision-making plan. And so when we did the retail analysis, we looked at restaurants and we said, all right, you know, where is the closest Texas Roadhouses? All right, in New Braunfels and Live Oak. The likelihood of them plopping another one right in between those two, knowing what their driving footprint is for those types of restaurants, this is where we've been talking about, is saying it's going to require a whole lot more people to justify the additional facility.
Right.
And so you are absolutely correct, Mr. Mayor, in that businesses like that are going to look at the market potential and look at where their existing locations are and look at where their competitors are too. Mm-hmm. They're also considering that as well, because while they don't mind stealing business from someone that's not in their restaurant tree, they also realize neither of you will survive if you're both operating on half capacity.
Yep. Gotcha.
And
Okay.
so that definitely is something that's going to be a consideration for any retailer.
Okay, yeah, because the reason why I brought that up is, if we know that expansion has some built-in prohibitions, then maybe, it might be something that recruitment would be a higher priority for us. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Okay.
Well, and I would say expansion can also be helping Willie's extend its outdoor deck for another 8 tables. It doesn't necessarily have to be a second location. It could be, how can we help you at your current location be able to accommodate more people? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole new one. And that's always a challenge, right? Because a new sit-down restaurant is going to require a minimum of 7,500 square feet, more like 10 to 15,000 square feet of demand. However, an existing 10,000 square foot user that wants to go to 12,000 square feet is a lot easier to accommodate that growth because the additional competition is incremental rather than substantial.
It's like Catalanos. Catalanos, they stay busy, and they built an outdoor deck on theirs using our grant program.
Yes.
To add some room for more business on nice days. So.
Yes, and that goes on all retail categories. So when you look at something like clothing store sales and you see that you have demand for 5,000 square feet, you can accommodate that through helping an existing clothing store expand rather than trying to bring a whole new one, which would take 30, 40, 50,000 square feet of demand to make happen. So we have a whole thing around the different things you could do from an entrepreneurial perspective. Once again, this is a longer term strategy. You're going to need an entire staff person committed to doing this to be able to do this well that you currently don't have. Now, if you say, well, we'd rather do entrepreneurial than small business, then you can shift gears on that staff member. But there are a number of different things that we encourage you to consider if you are going to move in that direction. One is a physical location that can either be, should be not either, it should be and, not or, a training center where folks can get access to like the small business development stuff from UTSA. It could be a workforce training location that you can do in partnership with your schools and with local colleges. Also, could be some physical space for incubator for small businesses to have a short-term, low-cost location to go into. We recommend trying to co-locate that with your economic development staff so they're in that physical space to have a physically committed location where Cibolo's economic development occurs. I think that's something that would have a tremendous value, not just for helping existing businesses and helping folks looking for jobs, but also for a recruitment perspective, a place where you can take them that is committed and has the how do I say this politely, has the cachet to make the community look like a very serious player, especially compared to other larger communities, not just here in San Antonio, but throughout Texas and the rest of the United States that you're competing with for those types of businesses. We talk about the partnership with the SBDC. They're not going to open a new location here, but you can create virtual connections. You can identify, and as you market and provide resources, and entrepreneurs know that Cibolo is a place to go, you may get them to come out once a month or twice a month to offer on-site training from their facility. That's, once again, as you build up and you prove the concept. Consider an entrepreneur incentive program. The incentive page on the website right now it has a number of things that you're willing to do, but doesn't really explain how I get access to it. And so under the tools, when we discuss about creating formulaic incentives, you should create an entire small business entrepreneurial incentive package. If you open your business here, this is what we will be willing to do for you. If you move into a brick and mortar space, this is what you're willing to do for you. If you bring 5 jobs, we have on a per job basis for any company coming in under 10, which may be less than what you're willing to give to a large user, but it's going to set you apart from a lot of communities, not just here, but throughout Texas, that you are focusing on those entrepreneurs, those home-based businesses, trying to help them grow in your community. And those investments generally are a lot smaller because it's not going to be as much than trying to bring in a large 200, 300, 500 person or multi-billion-dollar investment company, which is frankly going to require the state's participation anyway. Did you have a question? Okay. You're just admiring how you and I have a very similar haircut? Okay, very good. Excellent. And then, like I said, for this to be effective, it's going to require staffing that you don't have. So if I leave you with nothing, if you're going to focus in on small business development and you're going to focus in on some marketing, outreach, communication, which is the other immediate thing you need to do, please don't ask this to happen as well. you all will decide at the end of all this what we're going to do first, second, and third. But I want to leave and impress upon you all, we're going to do small business development, and we're going to do marketing, outreach, and communication, and then we're going to throw this on top of it too. And by the way, you're going to do it with 2.5 people because it's just not going to be successful. So business recruitment and attraction in the short term is all about taking advantage of your partners that are already doing this very effectively and very aggressively and partnering with them to get the benefit of their efforts and providing focus on Cibolo when it makes sense. And yes, ma'am.
There's an opportunity, in the absence of, we always want to have, an exponential number of staff, right? Not possible. But in the absence of that, I saw where you mentioned the customer relationship management software.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's always an opportunity to have advanced digital tools,
Yep.
right? In the absence of having staff that you need, in order to provide that support and in order for that to be, let's just say I'm business XYZ, and although, these ladies are obviously doing a bang-up job, they need support, right?
Yep.
And in the absence of that, there may be other digital tools that are available to help walk me through that process so that by the time I speak with them, it's more of a support thing instead of them having to, stop and walk me through every single process.
Yes. So that's a great example. And when we talk about tool development, that's going to be in there. But that's a great example is on the website now, it's like, oh, you want to start a business in Cibolo? Here's the 7 steps that you need to do. You need to, there's a disclaimer at the end of it that says, but you need to talk to someone professional. You need to engage with staff during the process. And it doesn't really give me any detail of those 7 steps other than these are the 7 steps. And so to that point is, they may not be able to talk to every single person that has a question about starting a business, but if you create that tool and you expand it and you make it more robust, you can give them some of that information that they can seek on their own,
Right.
and then come in for clarification rather than the hand-holding of going from once upon a time to they lived happily ever after.
Right.
So
Because Hub comes to my mind for Texas's historically underutilized businesses, and
Mm-hmm.
they which is a very robust program that I'm sure there are a lot of small businesses here in Cibolo that would
Yes.
easily qualify for that.
The opportunity for collateral development is real because one, you're not going to get all the staff immediately to be able to do everything you want to do. Creating those collaterals, while it does take time, isn't necessarily something that requires a full-time person for a long period of time to do, and it's something that can live physically on a piece of paper and also virtually, so that someone can go online onto the city's economic development website and get a lot of that information. Right now, it's not there. I know a lot of that is in process, but yes, the answer to your question is, in the absence of having as much staff as maybe is ideal, there are ways to augment it with technology and with digital materials. And you see right there, expanding our marketing materials to be more focused on our target industries, coordinate recruitment with local and regional partners to expand without high costs. Taking advantage of SATX, I think, is one of the best things you can do. They go and attend conferences, they go to national conventions. Where it's in line with your target industry, say, hey, can we tag along? You don't have to pay for the fees to get a booth. You don't even necessarily have to pay to be a registrant in the event, but you get to be there and you can sell Cibolo specific information alongside the folks that are also very interested in that. And so that's just one example of how you can take advantage of what they're doing, reduce your costs, but expand your exposure. And then maybe someday, I would never encourage you, even when Cibolo is fully built out, I would say it may not be in your best interest to try and go hard charge for large-scale economic development recruitment, because that usually starts at the state level and at the very least is going to be a regional thing or a county thing. But you can expand in the small to mid-sized market over time as you build the capacity. But in terms of dollars that you're going to spend today with the resources and the staff you have, this is more, let's take advantage of the partners that are doing it than try and do it out of the gate. That's our recommendation. It doesn't mean you don't create the materials, so if someone has interest in coming to your community, it's not there for them to see all the great opportunities that there are, but I don't know if I would put a proactive effort out of the gate short term with all the other things. I think you're going to be able to see a lot more success for less money until you have that more robust budget and that more robust staffing capacity.
And real quick, before we get off that last slide, have you had a chance to take a look at the marketing materials and brochures that we use at trade shows right now?
Yes.
Okay. And I was wondering if you're, as part of this engagement, if you could, give our EDC some tips.
Yes.
And how to improve them.
Yes,
So
the document's going to talk about ways to try that we have seen other communities be successful that they can use to augment what they have and then maybe create additional that they don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Asset development. This is all about the physical places that businesses want to be. We modify land use regulation and activity centers. Hopefully you guys remember all the conversation we had around the opportunity sites. We provided some detailed descriptions of each of those sites based on our conversation we all had last time. In the primer that you have, there's an entire chapter in the report that's dedicated just to that stuff as well. And so trying to connect the vision that you define for each of what we're calling the economic activity centers with your land use regulations is a critical step. And this is where we start getting to some of those maybe uncomfortable conversations around housing diversity, around vertical mixed use, around a different level of development intensity, not widespread everywhere, but focused and strategic in areas where it makes sense, where it has the least amount of impact on the community, but creates the greatest amount of economic opportunity in the community. And so we detail kind of some of the ideas that we have for that. Read that section if you haven't already. It'll really drill down. I know we have one more meeting after this before we finalize it. So we're still in the listening stage. So if you have specific questions or issues around any of those, please don't hesitate to get them to Kelsey and Izzy, and they'll get to me and we can get them resolved before I come back and we put a bow on this. Work with your ETJ property owners on annexation. The reality is that while it is in the ETJ, there is tremendous benefit to you as a community to have them within your city limits. And I understand the legislation that came out not too long ago. I understand the hesitation. And this is why our focus and our recommendations around carrots and not sticks. How do we create it so that they want to be a part of the community? What can we do? What are we willing to do to encourage those property owners to become part of Cibolo so that we can expand our reach and implement our vision? And I think the area right now that has the biggest opportunity for me is the I-10 corridor. We talked about in between the two gateways along I-10 at the two interchanges as you come into the community from the east and from the west. Our focus from an economic development perspective is really that middle area north of I-10 where you have a tremendous opportunity to create a very large, very impactful employment zone where you're bringing in production-based and other types of larger scale, other types of, all of a sudden it was like right in my eyes and it was very distracting. So it is trying to bring them in and sell them on the vision, explain to them what can and can't happen, and then consider as a community what you are and aren't willing to put on the table to make that happen. All too often, those relationships are forced a lot of times through access to utilities. And that's definitely a way to do it. But in light of that most recent legislation that had come out around allowing folks in the city to leave if they so desire, if they haven't received what was promised or whatever, I think that partnering with them and finding ways to bring them in is a much better, much more sustainable, and puts you in a different position for success than trying to go the stick approach.
Yeah, I think we've had actually pretty good success in bringing industrial properties and businesses into the city from the ETJ. Like you said, through incentive agreements and things like that. But residential is the opposite. They just want out. Because as a landowner, there's really no benefit for them because they don't want to pay the property tax.
Well, and selfishly, once again, I go back to my job is economic development. And so the area that I'm talking about, particularly down along I-10, is all around job creation and creating more of those sites that we can then use to attract more Ishan type development. I'm not here to sit and promise that there are 7 more Ishans out there, but if you don't have the space for that type of user to come to your community, then they're not going to come to your community. Continue collaboration with your utility partners on serving your activity centers. I know there's been a lot of effort and if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of headway made in doing that. But as from an economic development perspective, as a goal for the community and as action steps that you want to continue to look at mid and long term, is how do you continue to consolidate those uses within a single entity that is a partner of the city? And then also considering what you as a city are willing to invest to make those things happen, even if it's a provider that isn't necessarily connected to you. Because if you can create opportunity for job creation, tax-based creation in the city by investing with a partner who also serves outside the city, is something that you need to consider, A, if you're willing to do, and then what is the get that we're going to have to get, jobs, tax base, whatever, in order for us to be willing to put that resource on the table. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Capitalize the EDC Property Acquisition Fund. I think it's a great first step that the city did in acquiring property to do economic development. If you read my opportunity sites section, we give you a number of recommendations of alternatives of maybe some of the ideas that have already been put forward. Obviously, you're going to need to do what is going to work on behalf of all the city residents, but that is a tremendous tool that you have to try and affect future economic development. And you need to be very selective. I want to be very clear about this. You need to be very selective and only go after those properties that have or I advise you to go after those properties that have a transformative or a catalytic potential for economic development, whether it's an I-10 property or something, along 1103 or what have you. I can't stress enough, once again, define the vision, set forth the parameters of what you are and aren't willing to do, and execute upon that. And it will be better for you in the long term if my history of working with clients doing things like this, that you set out specific parameters and then maybe wait an extra few years than try and do it ad hoc and constantly be flowing with the tides. So set what you want, make it very clear, and move forward with that. And if you look at the opportunity sites for FM 78, that's one area where you have set a vision. We've provided an alternative vision for you to consider. We're not expecting you to execute on our alternative vision. We're just trying to give you a sense of what is short-term, mid-term, long-term. You as a community then make those decisions based on informed information and then move forward on it. This is the same thing, is from a standpoint of what do we need to get out of this deal in order for us to make an investment that maybe only partially benefits the city, but may benefit areas outside the city more, but it gets us something that we want. The toolbox, I just talked about this, so I don't need to beat this up anymore. All your incentives, especially the ones on your website, should be an if-then statement. If you do this, then we are offering that. If you do that, then we are offering this. Be very, very clear about what you want and what you're willing to give in order to get that. 90% or more of site selection is done virtually. 90% of prospects or site selectors that are working with prospects, have already vetted your community before you ever even know they're considering not just Cibolo, but San Antonio or maybe even Texas. Okay, so putting out there what you are willing to do and they can understand what's on the table for them is going to create a lot more opportunities for you in the long run, because it's going to let them know that this is real, that you have an agreement in front of them. If you bring us 50 jobs, we're willing to give you this tax incentive. If you're willing to make a $1 million investment, we're willing to do this fee waiver. If you're willing to open a new business, your approval process is going to be 30 days or less guaranteed. Connect the things that you're willing to do with what you want out of them in order to do it. And then put in the clawbacks if they don't succeed. Because that's the other part. This is not about giving stuff away for free. I've been doing economic development for 25 years now, 26 years now. Geez, more than half my life. Wow. I've been doing this for a long time. And I have never once told a community, just give stuff away to get things to happen. That is not a sustainable or an effective economic development strategy, because the goal is only to give stuff away to get things that you can't get otherwise. And once you show proof of concept, you turn the spigot off and say, hey, look, we're the place to be now. And you can even ratchet them back over time as you prove the success. So determine what you want, determine what you're willing to give them, and make it very clear from the get-go.
Now, when you say that there's people out there evaluating, cities throughout the country, of course, I'm assuming they're going to the city website and then maybe the EDC, sub website or whatnot. And so, are there any improvements that you can recommend to our EDC department here internally within Cibolo as far as how to improve our online presence and make it look, desirable and have all those characteristics
Yes.
of winners, right? So that way people are taking that next step with us after looking
So
at
the
it.
answer to that is yes, and there's a number of them that we describe in here. But I would say one of the biggest ones is set up a Cibolo Economic Development website that is not tied to the city's website. To make Cibolo's Economic Development website its own standalone thing. A lot of times, folks, if they have to go to a city's homepage to find economic development, it's intimidating. And having something where if I type Cibolo Economic Development and a whole website just dedicated to economic development is out there, that is one step that I would encourage you to do in the short term. The next thing is, there's a number of things that we have in here that Kelsey and Izzy and I have already talked a lot about in terms of things that you can do differently to make it more dynamic. I mean, the site is organized well right now. There's a number of things where I think that we can expand and put additional information. There is some organizational, the whole area around citizen engagement for economic development isn't there, which we have a lot of recommendations. But absolutely, we're going to be providing those kind of ideas for them to execute. Yes.
Have you seen examples I wonder if an example comes to mind of a scenario where some business, industry, whatever, was brought to a certain town, partly on the invite involving these different incentives, but the business just failed because the people just don't know how to run a business. And the city ended up with this sort of a failure on their record, you might say. Have you seen anything like that happen?
Yes, I mean, so the unfortunate side of economic development, taking a step back from all of this and just kind of talking about it more theoretically, the unfortunate side of economic development is that not all business ventures succeed. I mean, that's just the reality of any business. If we take restaurants, I think the statistics are 90-some-odd% fail within the first 4 years of opening, something like that. So yes, I can give you examples of other communities where they have engaged with a company and either the company was not run by someone who made wise decisions, or the second the incentive ran out, they left in the middle of the night. I have that story I can share with you about a company south of Richmond, Virginia. They got a 10-year incentive. They opened up shop. The incentive ran out, and they literally in the middle. This is not fake. In the middle of the night, they cleared out the factory and were gone, and the next day the place was empty. And so there are examples of that throughout the United States. This is the reason why things like clawbacks, which are legally binding contracts within the provision of an incentive, are so important, because it puts you in a position to be able to recoup some of that stuff if the company is unable to execute upon what it promises. Now, if a company goes out of business and it goes bankrupt and it's a mom and pop shop and there's nothing to go after, yeah, you might be left holding the bag. But if you're working with a national or international company and they don't deliver and you have a contractual obligation that they have to give you back something you gave them, they may fight you, but they're not likely going to just ignore it because they have a reputation that they have to defend. You are never going to be guaranteed, and with our hospital conversations that we've had, I want to be very, very clear. You are never going to be guaranteed that your economic development incentives are going to prove successful long term. That's the risk that you're taking when you get involved in this business. No different than a risk you take when you open a business.
Right.
There's no guarantee of success. However, you as a community have to make a decision. Do we want to sit on the sidelines and hope things come to us? Or do we want to be a player in the game and try and affect change and maybe get more than we would have otherwise, just letting it happen naturally?
Yeah,
and that's really the whole game of economic development.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we need to have an open mind for as far as incentives go, because as long as there are cities in Texas that are offering incentives, then we by nature must do so as well. Because if they're looking at 2 or 3 sites and, site A is offering incentives, B and C aren't, they're going to A. You know what I mean? So they're going to pass us by to the next town over. I mean, I've even seen documentaries in the past about Walmart even that does that. They'll open up in a city somewhere. They'll do 10, 20 years. And once the incentive runs out, they'll just close up shop and then move to the next town over and leave behind a giant eyesore,
Yes.
behind, right? So
Which is why you never incent retail. That's another advice I give every one of my clients, because retail
never
is
incentivize
wholly-
retail.
Retail is wholly dependent upon the consumer base.
Right.
And if the consumer base is not there today, if that consumer base doesn't magically show up by the time the incentive's over, they're going to be on upside down. And so, yeah. So on top of that is there's also no problem, or you actually should be creative in saying incentives vary by type of development and location. There's nothing wrong with saying if you're a manufacturer, this is the schedule. If you're an office user, this is the schedule. If you're a small business, this is the schedule. If you're willing to locate in this location, we're willing to give you this. But if you want to be in that location, we'll give you 80% of that, because we're really trying to push business there. You as a community, and when I worked with DeKalb County, Georgia, they did that. They scaled their incentives, and they scaled them also based on location within the county, because they were trying to incent businesses to go to certain areas to try and strengthen those parts of the community. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you saying our I-10 incentives look like this, our FM 78 incentives look like that, and our I-35 incentives look like this. So you can be creative with how you create those. Now, once again, I go back to the formulaic thing, is you need to make them clear, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with you saying, if you're willing to locate a manufacturing facility along I-10, this is what we'll offer you. If you're willing to locate a manufacturing facility along I-10 and then annex into the city, we'll give you that plus. And so those are the tools. It doesn't necessarily need to be one size fits all. And you're a big enough community, land area wise, and diverse enough community economically wise, that you don't need to have a single approach to every time you're trying to work with a business. And so that's definitely something you should consider. And then the one thing if you were to hire someone new, if you were to go from 2.5 people to 3.5 people, our recommendation would be the ombudsman position. And effectively what an ombudsman is, it's almost like an ad litem, where their job is to engage with businesses, either new businesses coming to your community or existing businesses that are trying to get something done, and help them move through the process. So they basically become an advisor on their behalf. It could be a full-time staff member within the economic development. It could be, you could contract those services, like you can contract with an engineer to provide discounted services, to do drawings that they need to do. But the ombudsman position helps a business and small businesses, and being a small business myself, I am not going to go learn all the ins and outs of the City of Alexandria's permitting process, because I'm going to use it once and probably never use it again. And so it's going to be a waste of my time to become an expert on it. But I'm sure I'm going to apply for something, and then I'm going to show up and say, oh no, you forgot to hand this in. And I go, oh, okay. And I go back and I bring it back and they go, okay, well now you need this. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me I needed that when you told me I needed this? And they go, well, you didn't have that, so that was first. And I go, forget it, I'm out. And that's what the ombudsman position does. It's someone that is in place that every business knows, if you need to do business with the city, this person's job is to help you do it right the first time, and to put you in a position to succeed and help you move through the process and have relationships with those department heads so that they can help you and they'll say, hey, look, your designs technically meet the requirements, but I know so-and-so, and they're going to want to see X, Y, and Z, so you may want to do that before you submit it, so that it's going to be easier to get through. So this individual, or this consortium of individuals, if you contract it out, are folks that are going to know everything they need to know and help your businesses move through. This was a recommendation that we were very successful with in a community outside of Atlanta that was seen as anti-business for a very, very long time. They hired an ombudsman, and overnight, the reputation of the city, because this person, the first 3 people they helped were like, I can't believe this is the same community that I've been doing business with for years. And so things like this not only benefit those existing businesses that you have, but then starts to help you build a reputation as being a community that goes above and beyond, which then gets you a competitive position for someone who may be considering your neighbor to the south.
Okay, quick question about,
I had to do the geographic.
yeah, a quick question about the ombudsman position. Now, because we suffer from that same problem as far as reputation goes. And a lot of times a business will open their doors and then they'll say to me privately, hey, listen, this is really a big pain, to get my business started.
Yep.
Because I had to go through all these hoops, just like you were saying, where, you gave me a list of 5 things. I did those 5 things. Here I am turning them in. Oh, guess what? Now there's 5 more. Why didn't you just tell me? And so, and I'm wondering, is this ombudsman also going to help with, the site plan, the permitting and all that, in order to get from raw land to finished business?
That's exactly. So they're not going to do it themselves, but they're going to be in a position to advise someone to get through that without hitting the tripwires. So yes, that's permitting, variances, development approvals, requirements like submission requirements that the city has of businesses, whatever it is. That this person's job is to be a catch-all to be able to help and advise folks that they don't have to go through that. That one pager that I was talking about that I pulled off the website earlier says, here are the things you do. You need to talk to staff, though. Don't do this without talking to staff. Well, okay, but there's not specificity in there about what each of those 7 things are. And once again, it's going to be intimidating to me if I have to come in and talk to staff 7 times, as opposed to talking to this person who's not located in City Hall, in theory, that can say, all right, it's this, then it's this, then it's this. Oh, and I go back to, it's like, you may have technically met the requirement, but if you don't do this or if you do this, you're more likely to get through than rather than having to get sent back to you. Your trees, and I'm making this up, your trees are only 12 feet apart. The community likes 10 feet apart. So if you can find a way to make the trees 10 feet apart, they're more likely to work with you to get it done quicker, and or maybe something else that they would have dinged you for, because you have that, it may help you get through. So that's just a random example, not so random because I've actually had that conversation in other communities before, but a random example for you of things that this entity could do for you, which is get someone so that they don't come in, hit the 3rd rail, go back, fix it, and then they move down the line, but then hit the 3rd rail again and keep getting zapped. Because it's even if they end up locating in the community, them saying it was a royal pain in my butt and I would never do it again if I had to, the problem isn't them. The problem is the next 5 of their friends that then choose not to come. I'm sorry?
Is the ombudsman, is that a portion of the EDC?
I would say it's economic development staff. Ideally, I would do that, yes. That's how I would do it. I would be a staff member under the economic development staff. Apply zoning changes. We talked a lot about this. You go through the opportunity sites. We talk in more detail about some of the things that we think you should do. I don't really want to beat this up any more than we have to, because we've already talked a lot about this stuff here. Outreach, communication, marketing. This is the other thing that, with your current staffing capacity, should be a high priority, and maybe an entire staff person committed to it, because there's a lot more here than I think you have done in the past. And the first one, which is the community outreach, which is up on the screen, the citizen outreach, is one of them. Some of these things you are doing, the state of the city, I understand you do it twice a year. Our recommendation is do it once a year. You do it once a year? I thought you said it was semi-annual.
The town halls are twice a year.
All right.
State of the city is annually.
Okay, fair enough. So our idea is an economic development committed community-wide event that's held once a year. So you're already doing some of this stuff. We're reassuring on that. A biennial resident survey is something that you should consider, taking the pulse of your citizens to understand. I know that everyone was surveyed out through the comp plan and the I-10 plan and the ED strategy all kind of hitting. You had the perfect storm of community engagement. Hopefully that doesn't continue into the future perpetually. And so there is a good idea of engaging with your community to ask them what their priorities are and concerns are, so that you can take that as, under advisement as you're looking to evolve your economic development efforts. Creating an online portal for citizens to engage. This is one of the areas you talked about, website changes, creating materials that citizens who are interested can learn what is economic development, How does it benefit me? Why do we do it? What are the components of it? And also allows them to communicate back. Hey, I have this idea. A friend of mine owns a whatever over on the other side of town, and they would love to, they had an idea of expanding over here. Will you reach out to them? So not only is it for a way to disseminate and get information that you can disseminate information that they can get from you, it's a way for them to engage anonymously, or it's a way for them to engage and not have to physically show up. Because that, a faceless post of saying, I have a friend who's looking to move here, is a lot easier than showing up at their doors and knocking on and saying, hey, can I talk to you for a moment? People aren't going to do that. They're not going to take time out of their day, but they may, or they say, hey, look, our website has a thing. If you have interest in opening a business, why don't you reach out to them? It's a lot easier to send an email than it is to physically show up. And so that's another thing that I think is a great addition to your economic development efforts. Because as you all know, economic development oftentimes will require zoning changes and policy changes and having things come into the community that may look different than things that have been here before. And if the community is going to raise an uproar over it because they don't understand it or they're afraid of it, stop me, by the way, if you've never heard that before, direct, proactive engagement with your citizens to explain to them what this is when you don't have a project in hand. Put that in bold-faced, all caps. When you show up as economic development with a prospect and you're asking them for a change, you have an agenda. You need to engage them on their turf without something in hand so that they will trust you to be genuine. When I served as the chair of an economic development organization where I lived for a couple of years, I went out and did outreach to some of the HOAs in our little area that we had influence over. And I was like, hey, I just want to tell you what we have going on, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it benefits you, see if you have any questions for me. And the first question always was, at every one of those meetings was, what do you need, what do you want from us? And I'm like, nothing, I'm just here to present information. And you just see the looks around the room going, I don't understand what's going on here. It took us doing that a few times to finally get them to understand that we truly did care about what they have to say, and we were trying to engage them. And it wasn't always, we have this project that's going to create this 5-story building 12 blocks or 5 blocks away from where you live. It's, we're truly trying to engage with you. It changed the dynamic of those discussions. And my point is, there's a whole component of communication outreach and marketing to your existing residents that is going to benefit you in the long run from an economic development perspective. Business outreach, expanding your industry roundtables within your target industries. Obviously, you have the downtown group already. There are some others that we think you need to create so that you can engage with them, get feedback from them. They can be your eyes and ears when you get responses from the business surveys. You can say, hey, we learned this. What do you guys think? This is a group of individuals, usually between 7 and 15, depending upon how active and engaged they are, where they meet quarterly, semi-annually, depending upon what your needs are. And it's your way of learning what's going on in their industry, engaging with them, giving them information of what you're learning and getting their feedback, and then also building the relationship with them so they can be an assistance for you when you're doing economic development. So if you have for example, a medical roundtable and you say, and you show them, hey, did you know that 94 cents out of every dollar spent by a Cibolo resident is spent outside the city? They go, yeah, we know that. We've been telling you that for years, and here's what you need to do. That's the importance of that conversation, because you're getting feedback and information from people who are living and breathing it every day. And so that's what the roundtables do. Develop, train your ambassadors. I mentioned this earlier. I need some stickum, because don't throw anything to me tonight in the game, guys, because I will not catch it. Is the ambassador program. This is volunteer business owners, retired business leaders, community leaders that engage economic development on behalf of and in tandem with the city. So it's everything from when you have a recruit coming into the community, you bring 1 or 2 of your ambassadors that can talk about their experiences and why this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, to your business outreach, your interview, you're trying to go doing your BRE outreaches where they can go and do it on your behalf because they've been trained, to individuals that can help you engage with other partners that they have relationships with. Economic development is a relationship business, And the more people that you have that have influence outside of your community, that have relationships with folks, the more successful you're going to be. Because it builds instant credibility and it builds connectivity. So a business owner that owns multiple businesses here in Cibolo and in Schertz can be a great way to build that municipal relationship, because they're going to have respect not of just the folks here in this community, but of the folks that are doing economic development there. And so I'm not saying you don't have those relationships. I'm just using that as an example. Execute networking groups and events, the detail earlier. We talk a lot about the B2B, the business retention expansion, having socials, having happy hours, bringing in lectures, topic-based lectures based on what you're hearing back from your surveys. You know, folks saying, for example, retailers saying, everyone's going to these non-staffed checkout lines. What is that about? You can bring someone in that has, if you know that that's a question that you have in your community, you can bring someone in that has knowledge of that and have them and provide a lecture for businesses in the community that are interested in that. And then, by the way, also we're going to have some hors d'oeuvres afterwards, and you guys can engage and network with each other. Once again, it isn't necessarily your staff making the connections. It's your staff creating the pathways for connections. That's going to be very important. Prospect outreach. You asked earlier about media presence. There's a number of recommendations there. There's another opportunity, in our opinion, of a mentorship program. You have a lot of military retirees, many people who are officers that are living here, very highly educated. You have a growing retirement population of people who have been there, done that in the business world across their lives. Creating a organized mentorship program to help young entrepreneurs who want to start a business talk with someone who's owned a business for 40 years, to help active duty military folks that are thinking about separating and starting their own business and talking with a retired vet who already owns a business here in the community. Creating those pathways to build those relationships is something that we think can be done and expanded upon in your community. As you get older, and once again, that's not a Cibolo issue, that's the entire United States issue, but as you get older, take advantage of those resources. I can tell you there's a number of folks that I worked with that were my mentors when I was coming up in the ranks that are retired and are literally pulling their hair out, the ones that have hair left, because they're bored to death because they have nothing to do. This can create an opportunity of a growing community where you're bringing people in to give them purpose, to help them be involved, to get access to resources for low cost or free, and then also to build a reputation as a community that engages with veteran business owners, or a community that values its retired corporate leadership. And so that's another opportunity. From an organization perspective, this is the people parts. Nail down job descriptions. I told you, our recommendations for the 2 full-time professionals, one is the business retention and expansion person, one is the marketing outreach and communication person. That's their primary job. If it's not under business retention and expansion or marketing outreach and communication, or the half, which is your leader, which is doing the face of the organization and administrative and relationship building, it's something that you need to consider what resources you're willing to put to make that happen. The more you dilute your 2 FTEs, the less effective we believe you're going to be in doing any of these things. And so that is our recommendation, define specific roles and then allow them to actually do that. Now, that takes a couple of things. One, we have to acknowledge and be okay with that we're not going to be doing any sort of entrepreneurial work or any sort of workforce development work other than providing information and feedback to those who are already doing it outside of us. And 2 is the very hard conversation of, do we invest more in our economic development to be able to do these other things? And I understand that can be a challenge, particularly short term, but if you truly want to be effective and get the most bang for your buck, being focused, I think, is going to be a lot more fruitful over the long term than trying to be all things to all people with a very short staff. Yes?
Do you think it'd be possible, just from an efficiency standpoint, to combine the role of the BRE specialist and the omnibudsman? Because the omnibudsman would be the person that is kind of holding their hand on the way in the door, and then also that person to maintain the relationship. And so let's just say we have constrained resources and we can only afford 2 or 3 employees. Do you think it would make sense to combine, those 2 roles into one position?
No, and here's why. That BRE position is a full-time job. And once you get the reputation of your ombudsman position, that's going to be a full-time job. And that's exact. Now, can a BRE person provide one-off opportunities to help an ombudsman concept? Yes. But I think the reality of the workload potential of both of those positions is more than just a single individual. And this is where I get you need to make lemonades out of lemons, right? And I'm very appreciative of that. But if you're asking me, should you combine those roles? My answer is no. I think you should have individual people doing that. Now, will you say we're okay with only doing 5 visits a month instead of 10 visits a month, and we're okay with only 4 roundtables instead of all 7, and in exchange, maybe you can help 2 or 3 businesses a month through the ombudsman process? That's a conversation you all have to have internally. My advice, a jack of all trades is a master of none. And there's a lot that goes into being able to be an ombudsman, because you have to understand all those different processes, and you have to understand all those different intricacies, and that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. That takes away from what you're trying to do, which is to build the relationships with those businesses who need the ombudsman, if that makes any sense. So, like I said, the ombudsman would be the first thing I would hire if you were to bring a new person on. The second would be an additional BRE specialist to be able to expand your BRE and maybe get into things like workforce development through BRE. And then the last would be the entrepreneurial. That's our suggestion. You can flip that any way you want. My point is that you're going to need those people if you want to do those things. That's our section 1, 2, 3. You guys use that as you will. Create a formal business advisory board. You have the EDC, which is fantastic, but you have a lot more business knowledge and acumen in this community than your EDC board. I do not want to expand your EDC board, because when it gets too big, it becomes useless. And so there needs to be an entity of individuals that are able to provide the EDC board feedback and thoughts on very specific issues and items related to their expertise and specialties that can support you. And then I can't tell you the value of having run an organization like that myself. I was part of it for 7 years, and then I ran it for 3 more after that, is having those experts, the retail experts, the restaurant experts, the medical experts, the industrial experts, sitting at the table and talking with you and giving you real-time information as you're trying to make decisions is invaluable. And so having a business advisory board that will focus on Cibolo related issues, because a lot of your partnership stuff is more San Antonio regional issues. Having a group that is just squarely focused on you guys to help advise and work with the EDC board, I think is a lot of value. If they see there's value, that can open the door in the future to be like funding partnerships through the advisory board, where, this is now a position of privilege. And so the expectation is you're going to donate $5,000 to the EDC fund to get on there. That's a long-term plan. I'm not telling you to do that out of the gate, but my point is that that's something that you can start building towards getting businesses to invest in economic development, not just the city. There's a lot of communities I've worked in where the businesses, communities smaller than this, with less economic development opportunities than this, where they've been able to show their business community the value of being an invested partner through the rising tide rises all boats concept. Create a local municipal alliance. I talked about this. Once again, you guys are really, really good at partnering with people on regional ideas and regional issues. You need to create something like that for yourself. It's okay for you to focus on you every now and then and not just be a good team player. You should continue to be a good team player, but trying to create an entity that is purely bring in your schools, bring in the community college, work with your other municipalities to see if you have shared interests, focused on things that Cibolo wants to get done. And then an economic development dashboard to highlight activity. In the plan, we've listed, I think it's 6 or 7 different dashboard items, and then we recommend the metrics in which to measure those against. And I think this is my last slide, right? Wow, you guys were really too quick to answer that question. But yes, it is. Thank God. At any rate, I want to be very clear on this one, because this is also an important issue. Economic development metrics need to be things that can be controlled by your economic development efforts. It can't be, we want to see $50 million invested a year, It can't be we want to see 3,000 more jobs every year. It can't be we want to see 15 new businesses open in the community every year, because those decisions go well beyond the ability of your economic development efforts to control. Recessions, changes in global economic markets is nothing you as a community will ever be able to sway. Okay? So I want to be very clear, when you're setting your metrics for economic development, it should be around what are we trying to accomplish, what are we doing, and what is the nexus between those two, and are we getting the desired outcomes? We've become a more business-friendly community. We've helped 5 businesses expand and bring on more staff. We've communicated with 27 businesses, and we helped these 5 do these things, these 6 do these things, and do that. That's how you measure success, not a blanket, ubiquitous measurement that your economic development efforts will never be able to control. You're going to set yourself up for failure if you go that route. We're going to provide you with a ton of recommendations of how we would encourage you to set up that dashboard, but it is too easy to say, well, how many businesses did open last year? Well, 7 closed. Oh, you guys are failing. Well, we had a pandemic. I can't control that. The federal government shut down every business for 14 months. That's beyond what Kelsey and Izzy can do. Maybe not. Maybe I'm underselling you, and if I am, I apologize. But the reality is that you need to set your metrics, you need to set that dashboard based on things that you as a community can control. And we're going to give you those recommendations. Take them or don't take them, but please do not go and try and say, you need to create a minimum of this every year, because that's not under the purview of your staff. So I'll leave it with that. Questions, issues, concerns, tomatoes, potatoes, wild celebration that the presentation is over. Yes, sir. Don't forget your mic.
Way early in the presentation, when you started, one of the first things you mentioned was that it's been found to be harder to rescue or change some sort of development, strip shopping center, than it would have been to start over completely on it. Do you remember that? And
Then to do it right the first time.
yeah. And that stuck with me, because I was wondering, well, how do we know? What are the tips that we need in our toolbox? Can we know for sure that we're doing it right the first time, or is it always going to be a gamble? And when I look at places that I think are examples of what you're talking about, back where I used to live and some in this area, I think, well, was it somebody's fault? Was it a failure on a part of the business? Was it the pandemic? You know.
So the answer to that question is, you're never going to truly know and be able to determine sustainability in the very long term, because the world changes. No one would have ever thought that standalone suburban retail campuses would be a thing of the past, because there are billions of square feet in suburban standalone office campuses throughout the United States.
Like shopping malls, right? They're
dying. Exactly right.
Yeah.
The death of the shopping mall is something that no one would have predicted. Now, shopping malls started coming into existence, I think, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, so they had a pretty darn good run. 50 years is an eternity for economic development. I want to be very clear about that, by the way. So things like that, no, you're never going to truly know if what you're doing is something that's going to sustain 50 years instead of 20 years. But what you can do is you can take a look at market dynamics. Like right now, another example is, and we talked about this before, office users want to be in a highly amenitized, walkable, amenity-rich area. They no longer want the suburban scale office development where it's an office building with a parking deck and then nothing that you can't walk to, that you can't get any lunch, you can't get your dry cleaning finished or whatever. They don't want that anymore. And to maintain a development pattern that separates out office uses from retail uses, from residential uses, perpetuates that. And so if we can accept the premise that if we want more office in this community, we're going to have to look at a product that doesn't really exist today in Cibolo, and we're going to have to allow it to happen, you can create the dynamic for that to happen, and it's something that will likely sustain at least longer than somehow incenting someone to build a standalone office building that may never actually get off the ground, to be honest with you. And it goes back to the point of like, we put money into a development and it never actually even succeeded. So that's an example of, can we do things differently than maybe other communities have done it, so that we're, 20, 30 years from now, we're not looking at a strip shopping center and going, how are we going to get this to be something more than it is, because it's no longer serving the community's needs. You're never going to get there, because there's always going to be evolution, but you can maybe skip a few rungs, I guess is my point.
So I think I hear you saying we're likely to shake up some of our preconceived notions of the way it should be and accept new parameters for the community.
You need to consider that if you want your new development to sustain longer and be more viable. And once again, I go back to, what are you trying to accomplish? And then what are you willing to do to happen? So if you want more office jobs in Cibolo, you're going to have to look at a different paradigm, if that's a priority for you, than the separated use concept, where office is over here in the office park and retail's over here on the corridor and residential is over here back behind it off the road. Those approaches are not going to be as successful for office immediately and in retail space in the long term. I mean, I can't point to a single one here in San Antonio, but I could point to dozens of communities here in Texas and throughout the United States where they have these old shopping centers that are half occupied, have churches in old anchor stores, and they're like, what do we do to get rid of this? And I'm like, you're going to have to dump a ton of money and go very vertical, because they're cash flowing to the owner. They may be unsightly and you may hate them, but they're working from a financial perspective. So if you want to change it to evolve that, then you're going to have to look at it a much different paradigm than, quote unquote, trying to do it differently out of the gate. And maybe it's not going to be as big of a deal longer term.
Real quick, there is one really close. It's called Windsor Park Mall. It was on Walsham Road. It became through an economic development project I was involved in with Windcrest, it became the rack space. And they just left last year after 20 years of being there. Just like you said, they found someplace else and went on. So that project ultimately took a 100 million square feet. I think, it's a huge mall, turned it into a data center basically, and headquarters for and so that's what you have to do with those.
Gotcha.
And there is a place called deadmalls.com where you can look at the ones that are available for sale.
Gotcha. Well, and so my point, and I want to be very clear, this is not about trying to change the character of your community, which is why I was very pained when I talked earlier about how do you blend the vision and the character of your community with your economic development opportunities. It's not about redefining Cibolo into something different or trying to be the new San Antonio. I understand that that's not going to work. The community doesn't want it. However, there is something in between that allows you to create better economic development for yourselves while still maintaining that character that the community has grown to love and has been bringing people here by the busloads. That was the point I was making. But yes, there's no guarantee that it's going to be forever. And I think that's a very important point to make.
Sure. So as far as this executive summary, I'm assuming we're not going to go through this paragraph by paragraph. We should just read this on our own time, right?
You should have read it already, Mr. Mayor.
I just got it tonight.
Yes. So that is.
Yeah, that's right.
That is. I'm just having some fun. That is the Cliff Notes. There's an entire report that fleshes all that out even beyond that.
Okay.
So yes, I would say engage in that. Kelsey, I don't know if we have a timeline for the next meeting or not.
We do not have it scheduled yet.
Okay, so the next meeting is hopefully the adoption. Thank you.
Adoption. Okay.
Is the adoption of the plan. So if you have thoughts, issues, ideas, concerns, please get them to them sooner rather than later, so we can make sure all of that is built into the final document that we put in front of you, which will be voluminous.
Okay.
Compared to this.
Marcus?
I mean, I guess before we do the adoption of it, will we get a chance to
Yeah.
take a look at the draft? I mean, you're going to be able to provide our staff
Yes.
the draft?
Yes. Kelsey's going to have a full completed draft by the end of this week.
Okay.
And then hopefully share it with you all that you can review it. And then whatever finalized version, if that's not the finalized version, we get to you for that adoption meeting.
Okay. Okay.
Is that, am I speaking out of turn? Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Kelsey will yell at me later if I did anyway, so I'm not worried about it.
I like the part where we get it by the end of the week, so that's on record.
Any other questions, issues, thoughts, concerns? All right. Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all your insight and engagement. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Motion to adjourn on the city council side. Got a motion and a second. All in favor? Marcus.
Okay, I'd like to do a motion to adjourn from the EDC.
Motion adjourned.
Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you.